So thank you very much, first of all, for this invitation. Needless to say, I'm fully aware that this is a very prestigious spot to present our research. Actually, it's a little bit more, Victoria, if you allow me, you will see that, well, we are focusing these questions from a number of different perspectives, so it's not really one paper. It's a bunch of very diverse questions that we ask with regard to emotions towards representations of economic inequality stimuli. But before I start, actually, I was not aware at all that this is the 100th colloquium. So, wow, thank you again for making this space for us, for this very special place in your series. And I was not made aware that speaking here would increase our chances to get the Nobel Prize, if I understand you correctly. Okay, so we hold you responsible if it does not work out, okay. So thank you so much again. As a matter of fact, I took the liberty to steal Franco away from you. Actually, when we started our collaboration, he was still visiting scholar here in Constance. And we connected over, of course, topic that really is kind of a topic that is passionate to all of us as we are sitting here, and of course also to Franco and me. And first we worked together on a 20% basis, and then we increased it. And then unfortunately, Franco decided to leave this wonderful place here and went back to his home country, which was certainly also an excellent idea, but which makes that we continue to cooperate with each other on a different contractual basis. But we are cooperating particularly on the issues of emotions that I have the pleasure to present today to you. Now, maybe also a little bit to promote my own research project. I do know, of course, that you are coming here in order to learn about the emotions. But on one hand, I would also like to position this part of the research in our project. And I also would like to just do some promotion on the project writ large. So I do think that the major research puzzles that I have put down here are some of them that we are all kind of pretty familiar with. And like, for instance, the negative impact of inequality, I think, have already been corroborated empirically quite convincingly by a number of researchers from all kinds of different disciplines. So we do know that increasing inequality, be it income or wealth, that really has an impact on social cohesion and performances in terms of economics and so on and so forth. There are several challenges in this regard, and I do know that this cluster is extremely active and has also produced a lot of output in terms of measuring also perceptions of inequality, as it is pretty difficult to empirically link individuals' subjective perceptions of income differences with objective and macro-level indicators of inequality, which very often are kind of working in parallel, but from a rational perspective, you would expect these linkages to be much more stronger, which they are not. And in addition to this, if we are really concerned about inequality, what is there that should be done about it? Well, maybe economists would suggest more redistribution. And redistribution, of course, is a zero-sum game, if you will. And I'm not sure whether you are familiar a little bit with the political context in France right now. They're also talking about La Loi Zuckman, which is kind of pushing forward the idea of really taxing the ultra-rich, which is super contentious in the political debate. And it may most likely not go through, but it is really on the agenda. But you can also observe in the media discourse and also in the political discourse which parties take which perspective, which are the ones that are more loudly heard, how do they frame these tax with which kind of consequences, and so on and so forth. So long story short, we are all concerned about the very same phenomenon, if you will, but usually we would find pretty weak links with political behavior. So individual perceptions of inequality do not strongly correlate with redistributive demands and preferences of broader political behavior. And this becomes all the more interesting and a little bit contested, if you will, looking at countries with particularly high levels of inequality, where you clearly would expect that the demands would be higher for redistribution, which is clearly not the case. It's maybe even rather the opposite. And there are some possible explanations out there for this paradox. We can think of the contextual nature of inequality. So understanding and advocating for redistribution are influenced by societal values and are not neutral processes. We can also think of perception versus what there is, so that there are consequential discrepancies between how individuals perceive inequality and the corresponding objective indicators. And then, of course, maybe not most importantly, but at least as important, there's also the idea of legitimization of inequality. So people may eventually legitimize existing inequality. And here, for instance, we can think of Jost's theory of system justification theory, for instance, or the belief in a just world, which is kind of asking also for a pretty interdisciplinary approach. At least this is my understanding and also kind of my conviction. And that is also one of the reasons why I tried really to solicitate also researchers from different disciplines, and why I do believe that it is such a gain to have Franco also on board, because he is bringing into the kind of research, especially the social psychological perspective. Now here, there's this a very brief overview of my project, my ERC project, which is called Polynequal. Victoria has also already mentioned this. And I thought this kind of cartoon that I discovered a few years ago really brings it to the point. So you do have, well, two people that clearly are coming from two different socioeconomic strata, and the one who seems to be a little bit better off, or far better off, tells to the other, so we are all in this together. Okay, so it's really some idea of how is it that you would frame it, and then I will continue along these lines. Now, in my research project, which is a 5 years project, the overarching research question is, under which circumstances do perceptions of economic inequality become politically salient? So under which circumstances really people or citizens would want to act on something that they perceive and that may bother them and that they really want to see changed. And I depart from three major assumptions that are situated at three different levels of analysis. So the assumption at the micro level is that perceptions of economic inequality are, amongst others, also a function of individually held distributive justice norms. What is it, what I'm thinking about? Equality, equity, and need, right? So the norms that we hold, they are not consistent and not coherent. They may vary very much across policies, but they are certainly also a driving force in how we perceive economic inequality in specific situations. At the meso level, I would argue that processes of politicization are crucial in this regard. When we think of discourses of political elites or media discourses. And at the macro level, and this is where I think the comparative perspective really kicks in and becomes relevant, is that my claim would be that these distributive justice norms are also and pretty strongly associated with the institutionalized, with the norms that are institutionalized in these specific welfare regimes. And this is why for this project, I have selected 3 countries that are prototypical, if you will, representations of the welfare regimes that we can think of. Sweden as a social democratic one, France as a conservative one, and Great Britain as the liberal welfare regime. Knowing that when I say prototypical, that all 3 countries have undergone very important changes during the past 20 to 30 years, and that they may also have changed some of their profile in the meantime. But still there are these ones where I would also expect to identify systematic cross-country differences. Now here, I attempted to kind of integrate these different levels of analyses into a broader framework, if you will. We have the socialization, which is on top. So the societal norms of distributive justice that are really playing a crucial role in our project. Maybe less so with regard to the emotions here right now, kind of underlying, but we did not really follow up on it so clearly yet. But for the project writ large, really important. The elites discourse and the media frames that we are interested in. And then what you have here is the micro level, so the individual part, the perceptions of economic inequality, as I would argue, are a function of a number of different aspects, the norms of distributive justice, but also personality traits, values, socio-demographics, networks, ideology, of course, political knowledge. And all of this is also kind of integrated with emotions, attitudes and preferences, and social and political behavior. So this is, if you will, a little bit the parts that the research project tries to address, and in a hopefully more or less structured manner. And the structure that I gave to the project was 5 different work packages that are meant to speak to each other. Some speak more to others than others. So the idea really is that the findings of these work packages should really kind of inspire also the following ones. We started out with the focus groups. And this is something that I'm going to come back in a moment. Focus groups where we are asking for everyday heuristics of economic inequality. So what kind of signs and cues people would mobilize in order to make sense of economic inequality in their proximity, if you will, and in their city, in their region, and in their country. We have also looked at and analyzed very carefully party programs in our 3 countries, looking for these inequality cues. We are currently about to do the media analysis, similarly also with these keywords on economic inequality, and also trying to distinguish these 3 different types of distributive justice norms across 8 or 9 different policies. And we have already conducted representative surveys, and we are now in the very last phase of preparing our framing experiments, trying to integrate what we have identified in these work packages and try to test some of them, the most promising ones, if you will, and test them in an online framing research design. So thanks for your patience so far. So this is the promotion part of the project, if you will. And thinking about emotions and political science is not something that I was kind of acquainted with when I started my studies at the University of Mannheim. We had some people very strong also representing, for instance, rational choice theory. And I do think talking about emotions would be something that would have been far off the kind of the scale or the screen. So clearly something that would not have been on the research agenda some 20 years ago. And interestingly enough, emotions also did not figure in the very first edition of the Oxford University Handbook of Political Psychology, which was edited in 2003. So even then, there was no chapter on the importance of emotions, right? In the second edition, though, there is one. And since then, I would argue, well, yes, even us, and I still consider myself to be a political scientist in a way, with a strong tendency towards political psychology, though I have to admit, we have more and more integrated also the relevance of emotions in the research. And I do think probably, please tell me if I'm wrong, maybe one of the most prominent representatives is George Marcus in political psychology with his affective intelligence theory. And here he mainly focuses on emotions such as anger and fear, right? I'm not going into detail at this point, but we can of course also think of the expanding research field on affective polarization. I mean, it is in the terminology already, where social identity theory also kicks in where we do need to juxtapose in-group versus out-group identification. So it's a big melange, if you will, of drawing also on psychological and social psychological theories and research. And of course, affective polarization emotions here are very relevant as well. But I would argue that in political science, we mainly focus on anger and fear. And sometimes you also come across things like enthusiasm and pride. But anger and fear, I think, are the most visible emotions in this regard. And as an example, I think this really kind of speaks to it. Maybe some of you are also working with the ISSP data. And we have the ISSP Social Inequality module of 2019. And this is a survey which has been conducted in 30 countries globally, and where one of the variables that has been newly introduced is anger in association with perception of wealth and income and wealth inequality. Right? So yes, you can see there is something going on. And now it's for me a moment to take a brief break, because Franco is the one who's going to talk about emotions in social psychology research.
Well, thank you, Sonja. Let me first say hello to everyone. It's great to be back to the cluster in my virtual form today. And it really means a lot to me to reconnect with you, where I have so many good memories. So to start my part, let me just give you a quick overview of how social psychologists have addressed the study of emotions in three particular theories, major theories in the field. The first one that I want to mention is the theory of basic emotions by Ekman. Here, a specific event trigger a specific set of emotions. For some authors are 6 basic emotions, some others say 8 and even 15 different emotional states with unique features, including facial expressions and physiological responses. Then we have a second theory, appraisal theory, making the focus more on the cognitive evaluation of external stimuli and how this evaluation plays a role in the elicitation and variation of emotions. This evaluation includes different components of appraisal, and in our work, we rely on this theory by exploring perceived causes of inequality that I will introduce to you in a moment, and also social dominance orientation as possible appraisals. So, and finally, the theory of constructed emotion by Barrett is developing the idea that the emotions are not discrete, but rather categories with fuzzy boundaries among them, and they are interconnected. So emotions emerge based on social roles, and also are culturally shaped. We also rely on this theory in our study, expecting differences among and across our countries in the elicitation and variation of emotions towards inequality. So facing the same stimulus, we expect different emotional responses shaped by culture and different welfare regimes. To talk about some of the recent research conducted in the field. So here in different contexts, research has shown that emotions play a critical role in determining support for policies that address inequality and aim to reduce poverty. Among the emotions studied, we can highlight moral outrage that stands out as one of the strongest predictors of support for redistribution. And other emotions also vary depending on how people explain causes of poverty, which is the point that I want to make later on perceived causes of inequality, because these attributions are linked to emotional responses to poverty/inequality. So for example, to explain poverty and inequality in terms of laziness or lack of effort, like putting the focus on internal and controllable factors, make people to experience more negative emotions towards income and inequality. And in contrast, when people is making focus on the uncontrollable factors or external controllability, then people is more likely to experience like a sympathy or empathy towards people in poverty.
Thank you, Franco. As a matter of fact, I think it's fascinating also to see that a number of these studies are mainly drawing on research on poverty attributions, right? And not so much on economic inequality. So that's something where we thought, gee, there may be a gap potentially to be filled. And well, in terms of the rest of our presentation, here's a brief outline that I would like to present to you. We are now turning to the empirical part of our research, which is mainly drawing on the work package 1, where we have conducted our online focus group discussions, which also was in the middle of the pandemic, which is exactly the reason why they had to be administered online, but it worked pretty well, I should say. So well, it was okay. And then in addition to this, also our findings based on our work package 4, which is the one with the representative surveys. Now, first of all, I would like to present to you the emotional patterns in a descriptive manner, then demonstrate why we should care as political scientists. So really kind of try to depict also the associations between these specific emotions and redistributive preferences. Then going one step further, looking at the socioeconomic and ideological antecedents of these emotions, and then delving or digging a little bit more deeply into social psychology research, but also in one of the arguments that you often would find, which is, for instance, that people maybe have no really accurate idea about inequality because they are living in pretty homogeneous surroundings. So we thought, why not test it with the contact hypotheses, for instance? So that is something that we would like to show you. And Franco then is going to talk about the attribution theory that we have also tested on the emotions, and last but not least also the social dominance orientation theory, which has also become pretty relevant in the perception of inequality. Maybe you remember, I think Hannah Waldvogel was also here at one of the conferences here, and she is the one, I think, who is really advancing this kind of relevance of the social dominance orientation and to what extent it really has an impact on one's perception or not of economic inequality. So that's why we thought this could really be an interesting additional case to follow up on. And then, of course, a summary and the main insight so far, but it's very explorative on one hand, and it's still a lot of work under construction. Now, just to be a little bit more specific about the data that we have collected, talking about the online focus groups, we have administered 24 of these groups, 8 per country, and each group consisted of 6 participants, grosso modo. The duration was 90 minutes. And what we did, we kind of cheated a little bit because we thought we have already organized our participants, so why not also let them answer a short survey before the discussions and a short survey after the discussion. And that becomes relevant because after the discussion, we also asked them some questions about their emotions. And I will come back to that shortly. The N of all of these participants is 145, so pretty far from being representative, but yet giving some interesting insights nonetheless. And these focus groups were fielded from December 21 until February 22. And then we and this is where I think Franco pressed me really hard on this. For the work package 4, we have first conducted an instrumental study to develop measures on emotions, because I was so simplistic in my assumptions. And he said, no, that's not how you can really measure it. And then we said, okay, we need, before we go into the field with a representative survey, we need to have some kind of an instrumental study in order to get a much better understanding of what it is that we are measuring. Is it okay? Is it a good proxy of what we want to see or not? And I really think this helped us a lot in order to identify also the relevant emotions for then the last part of the data set, and from which I would like to present you the results, the representative online surveys that we have conducted, and you're going to see that also for some very specific Sweden-related, ethics committee-related reasons. We first conducted our representative online surveys in France and Britain last summer, before the general elections. In both countries, these were snap elections. So we had to hurry in order to get our survey fielded before the results were in. And then the Swedish case was a little bit more complicated, because you certainly know that before you field whatever you want in Sweden, you need to get a separate Swedish ethics committee approval. And this is a little bit time consuming, and which explains why we decided to get our 2 countries first in the field, and then the Swedish come a little bit later on. And for some of the analyses, you will see, we have mainly done the analyses on France and Great Britain, and Sweden is still kind of lacking. And for others, we can give you the complete picture. Okay. So maybe something just to give you some kind of insight into some comments that we collected from our online focus group. As I said initially, actually this was pretty explorative, and what we wanted to know was the cues, the heuristics, and the signals that people would mobilize in order to make sense of economic inequality in their neighborhood, in their city, in their region, and in their country. And the initial idea was that we have plenty of data in quantitative surveys on people's assessment of the perceived distribution of income. And there are very few missing values for these variables, but we do not really know how people make up their cognitive assessment of it. We have no really, well, it's possible that I ignore that, but people give you an answer and you would not really know exactly upon which they are really basing the answer that they are giving to you. And that is exactly what we wanted to know. And we started out by the most proximate level of a person, and then getting further up and further up. So this was the initial purpose of these focus groups. But then after having asked these questions, we also wanted to know a number of other things. And one of the other things that we were also asking them were about the emotions. So interestingly enough, in all these 3 countries, participants would more or less say that inequality is an issue that they feel about. So there were not that many participants who would say, well, that's not a problem at all, although there were variations. But what I wanted to say is that, right, so in terms of the emotions, this was one of the questions that we were also asking as a follow-up. And here are, from the 3 countries, 3 examples that we thought are really kind of very telling, if you will. Where, for instance, Norbert from France, who says, it pisses me off. So it also did not really hold back. Right, so there's maybe the Swedes were much more kind of reserved. The French certainly were not. Well, but this is a cultural observation. But anyway, so Norbert from France, he says, it pisses me off. It pisses me off to see people like that. In this day and age, we are not in the Middle Ages anymore. We make money. In our country, there are people who drive a Tesla, and there are other people who eat sandwiches. Again, this is Norbert from France. This is offensive maybe in the French context, and it's not so offensive in other contexts. But for the French context, just to eat sandwiches is maybe something that is indicative of not having enough resources. So in French, you say casse-croûte. you know, maybe this expression of Casse-croûte, so it's like, okay, so you just have to eat something in order to stay alive. Well, who asked for a sandwich? Well, certainly not the French, I'm sorry to say. It drives me crazy when I see that, right? So Norbert, who says, it drives me crazy when I see that. And then we have Vivian from Sweden, who says, there is frustration and irritation then too. Some people who really need help don't get help. Then some people slip through society and get help that others would have gotten more easily. So here, frustration and irritation, and Norbert, who has just gotten completely crazy, if you will. And then Amelia from the UK says, it is sad that you feel that you can't help. And, well, trying to summarize all of these answers that we have collected, there is mainly a sense of resignation, of disenchantment, that inequality would never be overcome, and not necessarily, which I would interpret as not to be necessarily conducive to political participation, where we do know that a sense of internal political efficacy, for instance, which is not necessarily an emotion, but we do know that it clearly drives political participation apart from voting. And what was also pretty remarkable, when now I come back to this zero-sum game, talking about redistribution policies, because if you give something to the poorer, you need to take it away from the richer, right? But in these focus group discussions, there was a notable absence of expressed feelings towards the rich and the wealthy. So people were very concerned about what they saw, but there were hardly anybody who would have suggested, yeah, well, maybe we should change policies and really claim more redistribution. In my view, very notable. So our research examines whether the manner in which economic inequality is framed here by means of addressing a particular type of representation of economic inequality affects individuals' emotional responses to it. So this was then the follow-up in the survey of these very same participants, because that was also our understanding. It is not only about income and wealth inequality. These inequalities are also enshrined and represented by different groups of people. And this is, I think, where also the welfare regime argument kicks in. Talking about social beneficiaries, for instance, in the UK context, is a completely different one, talking a lot about deservingness and undeservingness than compared to, I would argue, the Swedish context. The French are a little bit in between. This is clearly also something that our data is kind of showing us. And considering that inequality is an inherently relational phenomenon, we measure a broad set of emotions elicited by different types of advantaged, rich people and taxpayers, or disadvantaged poor people and social beneficiaries groups, and by income and wealth inequality as different types of economic inequality. So this is how we try to kind of stretch out and really grasp and cover a broad field, if you will. And the focus group is really something that gave us some initial insights. And here's just a very brief presentation of that. I mean, of course, the N is extremely low, so you cannot draw any general conclusions, but there are some hints. Like income, here we still have income and wealth inequality kind of lumped together in the focus group, something that we did not do later on anymore. And then we were also asking them about their feelings towards people living from social benefits, knowing about the discourse of deservingness and meritocracy, for instance, in different welfare regimes, and people who have much more money than oneself. And I see that you have also invited one of the authors of The Economic Other, right? Where this is clearly also something that is super relevant. And this is a selection of emotions that my team members and I at that time had kind of collected. So we were thinking of what kind of emotion could be relevant. So this was not based on any previous studies that somebody or we have conducted. Of course, we drew on other research. But this is something that we thought, okay, that could make sense. I think what we did not have in this case here was a positive emotion, right? So everything is pretty negative, and a positive emotion is something that we included later on as well, you will see. So the sense of powerlessness is pretty strong. And again, doing research on political participation and you come with this kind of sense of powerlessness, this is not a trigger for going to the street and making claims. People are also pretty sad about the situation, or about inequality, if you will. The picture is a little bit more mixed when it comes to talking about people who receive social benefits. And if you allow me, something that I clearly would like to draw your attention to is here the very high number of, at least in the French case, right? The high number of people who are declaring indifference towards people that are richer than oneself. And of course, talking with psychologists and claiming that indifference is an emotion is a hard case to justify. But gee, this is what came out of our follow-up research, right? So we thought this is something, this is kind of conceptually maybe a little bit washy, but clearly this was a mentioning that was really repeated over and over again. So we felt kind of confident to keep it in. And then to follow up on the work package 4 data. And as I said, we really felt that we need to conduct a kind of a pretest that we here describe as instrumental study. So really in order to get a much better understanding of whether we make a good selection. And the other question also was how to measure the emotions, because in the focus group part, it was just a dichotomy, yes, no. And then Franco said, you cannot measure emotions in such a way. You need a scale, right? I said, okay, let's think about using a scale. But we were also not so sure whether we haven't missed something of emotions. So what we tried to do then was to ask our pre-test participants, and all in all we had 300 participants, 150 in France and 150 in Great Britain. And we split them, and Franco, you correct me please, but we split them. One of the groups were presented with this selection of emotions, right? And they had to select 3 of them initially, and then in the second step, select the one which they thought was most important. So you see, it's really very encompassing. You say, okay, well, it's not very distinct. But then we also thought what is relevant is to give them the chance to mention emotions that we have not even thought about. So the other 150 participants, excuse me, they were asked an open question. What do you think, right? When you think about economic inequality, what kind of emotions would come to, well, what are the emotions that you feel? To really have this kind of backup, either a confirmation or some kind of falsification, if you will, of the selection of emotions here. And this is also something, I'm sorry, well, this is really something I think you do not necessarily automatically think about that, but I truly believe it is meaningful. We did not expect that initially. So here is the distribution of the answers in our 2 countries in terms of income inequality and rich people. So these were the 2 stimuli that we used for the instrumental study, right? And I think, now that I'm a little bit confused, we have 2 columns here for Britain and 2 for France. It should be N and in percentage, I do believe. Maybe there is something that I missed in copying. But what is really, really interesting, in my view, is the number of people who said they can't choose. So it's really those guys who either don't have an opinion, don't form an opinion, or have any other reason not to express an opinion. So this is clearly a group of people who is considerable and which is also politically relevant in this very relevant domain that we are all doing our research in. So can't choose again, and then frustration, powerlessness, disgust, moral outrage kicked in, anger, sadness, indifference here again. Helplessness, hopelessness, so it's going a little bit further down. And here's our admiration. So, and we decided to also have some positive some positive emotions included, and all the other ones were kind of excluded. Interestingly, because personally I would have expected much more also that guilt would also be a relevant feature in this regard. But based on the data that we have collected, this was not the case. All right. And then this is the word cloud that Franco produced based on the open answers, or the answers to the open questions in the instrumental study. So this is income inequality in Britain and in France, and this is rich people in Britain and rich people in France. And I would claim there are cross-country differences. You are going to ask, how do you explain them? And I would tell you, let me think about it. But clearly there is, I mean, living in France for quite some years now, injustice, this is clearly something that is popping up in the political debate all the time. And in the British context, we have also some corroboration based on the political party programs that we have conducted, that even the Labour Party has not really made very strong claims about redistribution since 2015. That has changed with Corbyn, but from 2010, when they lost power, until 2015, even the Labour Party was not pretty strong in making these claims, right? So in Great Britain, the discourse is clearly a different one, and that also kind of shines through in these answers. And I think the differences are even more relevant when you are thinking of rich people both in Britain and in France. But maybe with a less negative tendency for the rich people in Britain and in France. Like what you see here is luck, work, right? Everything that we associate also with meritocracy. Like you're rich, probably because you worked hard, or you may also be lucky, right? So it's kind of, it's also shining through in our data. And then please bear with me, because now I would like to briefly explain how we designed our survey, which is a little bit, maybe a little bit confusing initially, but hopefully not too much. So what we did was we collected in France, Great Britain, and in Sweden samples of 3,000 participants. And these 3,000 were subdivided into 1,500 that were being asked questions on income inequality, and 1,500 that were asked about wealth inequality. Because we do know that, for instance, in Sweden, income inequality is much less pronounced than wealth inequality, right? And we have similar discussions of statistical facts also in the German case, for instance, while in the British case, wealth inequality is less pronounced. So we thought we would like to contribute also to this discussion. And we really want to know whether people do make a difference, right? When they are thinking of these different concepts of inequality. And then going back to these different groups and the relationship that is inherent in inequality research, we were also thinking of presenting stimuli to the respondents that do represent these specific groups, and that are also, well, in a way talking to the research that already exists, here the poor and the rich, but also driving a little bit ahead research on different welfare regimes when we're thinking about social beneficiaries and taxpayers, of which we would believe that the discourses may vary. You see 4 modules, and the income inequality is 1,500, and then we subdivided the income inequality into 750 being presented the rich people and the poor people, and the other 750 being presented with the social beneficiaries and the taxpayers. So I hope you can see what we were thinking when we were constructing these samples. And we eventually then decided to focus on 8 emotions. And why only 8? Because this survey was Also a survey where we needed to analyze the media consumption patterns of our participants. If you remember our other work packages, particularly work package 3 with the media discourse, so we really want to see how our survey data may or may not be associated with people's media consumption patterns, right? So that's why we had to dedicate quite a large part of our questionnaire to the media thing, and then there was not that much space left anymore for all other things, which is why we had to decide on 8 emotions only. And these 8 emotions were anger, moral outrage, contentment, frustration, indifference, compassion, admiration, and sadness. And the 6 stimuli I just presented to you were income inequality, wealth inequality, poor people, rich people, social beneficiaries, and taxpayers. And the question that we were asking was formulated as follows. When you think about this specific stimulus in your country, to what extent do you feel the following emotions? Please place yourself on a score where 1 means not at all and 5 means extremely. And the can't choose option was also offered, and the respondents had to answer to each of these 8 emotions. Now, here's the first descriptive results. And you see these colored spider webs. So the yellow one is representing Sweden, the red one is the British data, and the blue one is the French data. And I thought Franco was really making a wonderful suggestion because it captures, so visually you immediately see that the distributions of these different emotions are, first of all, more similar across countries than we thought, although we conducted also Turkey post hoc tests and we could identify that these means in many instances were significantly different across countries, but initially here it does not really look like this, and that you have different shapes of emotional distribution across different groups of people, or, well, across different stimuli, I should say. And personally, please allow me to make a very personal remark. Personally, I think it's particularly interesting to see that income inequality and wealth inequality, they are not that distinct from each other. So maybe this is all kind of lumped together in people's brains. And I would also argue that, gee, poor people and social beneficiaries, if you really think rationally about it, are probably both groups of people with less material resources or little material resources, right? So I would say, well, probably we are talking about similar groups of people, but this is not reflected in the distribution of the emotions that you can see here. Right, so Victoria, she is right. She urges me to press ahead, and that's what I'm going to do. So we conducted some linear regression analyses. We also have conducted some parallel multiple mediation models. And I also conducted some principal component analyses in order to find out whether or not these emotions that we painstakingly have sorted out separately are not in a way kind of lumped together. Which in a way they are, but we wanted to see and continue our analyses with a separate set of emotions, nevertheless, if you allow. Now, why shall we care as political scientists? And we have also fielded this classic redistributive preference variable, where respondents are asked or are presented the question, there are a number of opposite views on the issue of taxes and social spending. How would you place your views on the scales from 0 to 10? So this is a very nice, I think, question where really you have to take a choice. Either 0 would be government should decrease taxes a lot and spend much less on social benefits. And on the 10, on the other part of the scale would be government should increase taxes a lot and spend much more on social benefits and services. So probably many are kind of positioning themselves somewhere in the middle, but you can also have the choice, and that really would be a nice indicator of where you really are in terms of these redistributive preferences, which is really reflecting the zero-sum game, if you will. And then we have control for the usual suspects, including left-right orientation, because we thought this clearly, if you want to analyze redistributive preferences and you're not controlling for left-right, maybe you really are missing out something very important in this regard. Now, these are some visualizations of our effects. The bold ones are significant effects, and the ones where there is little color left are the insignificant effects. And interestingly, we would like to point your attention to the role played by moral outrage. We have these analyses across Britain, France, and Sweden, right? Moral outrage and compassion, which seems to play a major role. Actually, I need also to say that we have conducted these models and we had all these emotions in the model, but we also controlled for multicollinearity, because that is clearly a major issue here, right? Particularly when I want to make my next claim, which is, well, not this one, but the poor people here are clearly also, or emotions towards the poor are clearly also reinforced by moral outrage. So there is clearly a strong, or there is a significant association between moral outrage and redistributive preferences. Much more so than would be the case for social beneficiaries. So a moral outrage here is not really showing up as a relevant one. Sadness clearly is also something that we would like to point out. And another thing in the French case, which is pretty interesting, is that anger towards social beneficiaries is rather diminishing people's preferences for redistributive policies. And I think the point that I really want to make here in terms of moral outrage is that moral outrage seems to be a strong driver, but much more so than anger. But of course, the argument could be that moral outrage and anger are so strongly associated with each other that the one is eating up the effect of the other. But for us as political scientists, maybe this is an interesting part of the story, focusing maybe a little bit too much on anger, while there are a bunch of other emotions out there that may even provide more insights into what we are also interested in. I'm not going to do the short summary. And I'm also not going to talk a lot about the antecedents of emotions. We have also controlled for, well, so subjective social status, left, right, income, female, education, and age. Okay, we see that there are variations across the different emotions, sometimes even across the countries. So there is so much in there that for me, at this kind of first sight, it's very difficult to find a systematic interpretation. But clearly there is something going on, or some things going on, which invites really to talk about this more clearly. But I would like Franco, because we have literally no time left anymore, to skip my contact hypotheses and to offer you the floor.
So yes, we consider three different psychological antecedents of emotional responses to inequality. One is the contact with poorer and richer people. The second one is the causal attributions. And the third one is the social dominance orientation. So I'm just going to focus now on attributions for time constraints. So in our study, this psychological construct derives from the attribution theory, a well-established framework in social psychology that look at how individuals explain and assign causes to event, behavior, and outcomes, including economic outcomes. So existing research within this theory has shown the link with emotional responses to inequality, as I previously said. And Sonja highlighted, most research focus on poverty attributions and not so much in inequality attributions. So the next slide, let me show you how we measure causal attributions for wealth and also for income inequality. This is quite novel because it's a new measure. We are asking people, looking at the list below, who do you think is the main cause of income and the half of our sample wealth differences between people with a high income and low income. So, and then we present a list of different causal agents, as you can see here, with also the option of other cause. Well, some of the results, we can skip this if you want
Really?
to, we can come back. I mean, well, I can explain it briefly, but here are the different causes for the different countries. What you are seeing is a percentage. So the government across our three countries is blamed for income and also for wealth inequality. I mean, is considered to be the main cause of income and wealth inequality, as you can see, the government. And also there are some slight differences between income and wealth. Interestingly, like in the case of income inequality, private companies seems to be more important, explain the causes, and the same is happening with high wealth individuals in the case of wealth inequality. So we can see some variations how people explain income versus wealth inequality. So on the next slide, we are
Franco,
going to
just
see
one second. What I would like to mention is
yes.
that the result for trade unions surprised us because they don't seem to play a role at all. In none of the three countries, despite Sweden, the role of the trade unions, very prominent, particularly in the Swedish case. And we were also struggling here again with a large number of people who said that they can't choose. So that's kind of, it's reoccurring. And I think we have excluded them in the analyses that are going to follow now. Here they are, right?
Yes, exactly. Here in the table, you can see how different attributions affect emotions, our 8 emotions. But with as independent variables, we include private companies, high-income individuals, low-income individuals, taking government as our reference category, but excluding, as Sonia said, like trade unions, other cause also can choose because they represent, not in the case of can choose, but trade unions and other cause represent less than the 5% of responses. And can choose, we omitted due to its lack of specificity. So the control variables are the same than in the other models. And our results, if you pass the slide, yeah. Well, you can see that people that explain income and also wealth inequality blaming low-income individuals are likely to experience less negative emotions, such as sadness, moral rage, anger, and frustration across the three countries, across two stimuli. And then they are also experiencing more indifference. In the next slide, we can see this across countries again and across stimuli. So people explaining inequality again,
Oh no, Franco,
explaining
please.
income as wealth inequality, those terms, blaming the disadvantage. Yes, they are getting some psychological and emotional benefits by doing so. Our results suggest. Yes. So, well, and finally, this graph show us how the incorporation of the variables attributions gives more explanatory value beyond our baseline sociodemographic controls to our models. So as you can see, like the largest gains are for anger, sadness, and moral outrage, while other emotions like admiration and contentment exhibit minimal changes in the adjusted R-square. So this is pretty much, yeah, because we are not, I think we are not going to present it.
Thank you so much, Franco. So some conclusions that we derive from our work on emotions from work package 1 and 4 would be that emotional responses differ significantly in response to different inequality-related stimuli. In contrast to anger, which can be directed at different targets, moral outrage arises from perceiving third parties as being responsible for causing or sustaining injustice in the distribution of resources. As for feelings of indifference, results seem to corroborate Condon and Vychovsky's central arguments, which postulate that individuals try to avoid to compare themselves with richer people, as these comparisons also bear the risk to elicit feelings of inferiority. So here also a very psychological argument which is being made. What is more, indifference may lead to a decrease in demands for redistribution, if you think this is well earned, which is another finding of their fantastic research. Emotions also appear to be associated with redistributive preferences. Here, particularly moral outrage, compassion, and sadness are drivers for stronger demands for redistribution, but not anger. And then the cross-country analyses rather provide a mixed picture with several similarities and noteworthy differences that clearly need more systematic interpretation. Here are some summaries on the class-based context that I did not present, the perceived causes of inequality that Franco just discussed, and social dominance orientation that we are skipping here as well. The main insight so far and ongoing reflections of our team is that subjective versus objective inequality, divergences between actual levels of economic inequality and how people perceive them often arise from personal experiences, observations, and broader political or societal influences. Varied emotional responses there are. So economic inequality can take multiple forms, yet not all elicit the same emotional reactions, ranging from anger and sadness to powerlessness and frustration, for instance. The psychology and awareness should be also being taken into consideration. Recognizing and interpreting inequality is a dynamic and an identity-shaping process influenced by social comparisons rather than a simple acceptance or a rejection of factual information. Now, that's our claim we would make. Distributive justice norms, these conceptions of right or wrong and what deserves political focus, are shaped in part by welfare state principles and their embedded ideas of distributive fairness. And political contingency, political engagement with economic inequality is not automatic. It often prioritizes specific policy preferences rather than simply reflecting objective realities. And last but not least, if we try to take all this together, these findings underscore the importance of both attitudinal, belief-based, and affective, emotion-based processes in shaping public support for redistribution. And now I have to do a big thank you to your patience and your attention that you are. Thank you.